So benefits of strength training. I'll say the first benefit of strength training, if you look at this image here, is you can pick up your kids from school. Some people use a car. I use a bamboo pole. I'm just kidding. But if you want to pick up your kids, you don't have to use iron for weights. There's all sorts of ways to use weights. But there are other benefits of strength training too. It mitigates each of the age-related degenerations we mentioned on that first slide about aging. Particularly those last three that I mentioned were measured in per year losses rather than per decade losses, which is muscle mass, strength, and power. Those are the things we start losing the most quickly after the age of 40, unless we work hard against them. And as I'm going to describe soon, those are the things that are most closely tied with a long, healthy life like Joe and Jack had. So strength training can directly halt those upwards of 90%. You can delay or offset some of these things by over 90%. It maintains physical function and resilience. So just like Jack and Joe, I mentioned, they were able to do what they wanted. They were able to do hard workouts. They were able to bend dimes in half, if that is your thing, up until just before they died. And they lived an average of 100 years. So rather than having 50, 60 years, and then having this deterioration where you're not healthy, you can't do things, you're dealing with these chronic conditions and side effects from medications, they felt great, and then something killed them at the end of their life. Strength training helps you get that kind of health span. It improves brain function, brain aging, and mental health. And this is something that's just becoming more apparent as we start to study it more. So it's a very exciting field to be looking into. Strength training, aside from other exercise, aside from other healthy habits like plant-based nutrition, has its own unique benefits to mental health and preventing and offsetting things like dementia or other cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease. So that's pretty exciting. As I mentioned earlier, it maintains your metabolic rate because metabolism is more a function of your lean body mass, how much muscle mass you carry, and your activity level, how much you move around, how many steps you take. And that does tend to decline with age, but it doesn't have to. If you strength train to maintain your muscle mass and you make sure to move around a lot, you stay busy, you garden, you do chores, you go on walks with friends, and yeah, you go to the gym, your metabolism doesn't have to slow down hardly at all. It dramatically increases your resistance to injuries and your recovery rate from them. So if you remember the first slide with the cross sections of the thighs, we saw the nice dense bones that those thighs of the athletes had, whether they were 40 or 70, compared to that weaker, smaller, kind of gray looking bone that the sedentary individual had. Whose bone do you think is more easily broken? If they fall, which it's more likely to fall if you don't have strong muscles, you're more likely to bounce right back up and not get injured. Or if you do get injured, strong muscles with lots of circulation, dense, healthy bones are going to have a much quicker and easier time recovering from an injury. So that becomes more and more and more important the older we get. You want to avoid injuries. And when you do have an injury, you need to bounce back and get moving again. The other thing that's often not appreciated is recovery from illness. Strength training has ability to build muscle mass, to build resilience in all the other ways we're mentioning, but it bolsters your immune system. There's not too much understood about this, but one of the methods is through the mediation of your hormones. Strength muscle mass can actually release chemicals called myokines that have a myriad of effects across your body. And it is shown that people who strength train have more muscle mass, get sick less often, recover faster. And whether it's acute disease or an illness, when you check into the hospital, particularly over the age of 65, you can gauge what your recovery rate will be or your recovery chances will be based on how much lean muscle mass you have. It can be very much an asset in terms of your chance of bouncing back from something serious in illness as well as injury. So, as I mentioned, this is an exciting field right now, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. There has been a lot of studies coming out about strength training and not its effect on performance, because that's been studied for a long time, but its effect on health and its effect on lifespan and chronic disease. So I love seeing this and I love learning about this and sharing this information with you guys. The first study I wanted to mention, there's many studies, but I chose kind of my top favorites here, is grip strength was found, and this is a large meta-analysis with many participants over a long period of time, was a better predictor of mortality risk, which is your chance of dying from any number of things, than blood pressure. Blood pressure is often used as the gold standard. As your blood pressure goes up, your risk of dying from diabetes, heart disease, you name it, goes up as well. Well, it turns out grip strength, as grip strength goes up, your risk of dying goes down. And if you look at the graph I listed here from this study, the hazard ratio, which is another way of saying risk of mortality, goes down as grip strength goes up. And it's not a curve. It doesn't bottom out somewhere. It keeps improving. So those with stronger and stronger grip saw more and more protection from all the things that would normally kill them. And I thought that was very interesting because almost everything in health has a curve. There's some point where it bottoms out and balances off. But in this study, which had a lot of data, the stronger the better for that grip strength. Another one, firefighters. This was a Harvard study that came out a few years ago. For push-ups, firefighters able to do more than 40 push-ups in a row, just drop and give me 40, had a 96% lower chance of having a cardiac event than those who could do 10 or less push-ups. So it's another situation where you're looking at core strength, you're looking at upper body strength, and you're also looking at cardiovascular fitness because push-ups do get you winded. Someone who has a healthy body that's able to just drop and do 40 push-ups is much healthier overall and much less likely to suffer from an event tied to our #1 cause of death in this country, which is cardiovascular disease. This next one, I was very shocked at these numbers. Women over 65, I was looking at women and men, but women in particular who met this criteria they had for low muscle mass, which looking at body mass index and various things, it was the very lowest sliver of people who had the least muscle mass. So a small subset of the group. But those with the lowest muscle mass had a 63-time higher all-cause mortality rate. And that's phenomenally higher. Especially women as they got older, the ones who were the most frail, had that low muscle mass categorization, were much, much more likely to die from anything. And it was also seen to be very striking in men, but not as much so. It's 11 times more likely in men. So that is profound that especially as we get older, muscle mass protects us from virtually everything that might kill us. Total mortality risk in this next study is significantly lower for those with basically the most muscle mass compared to the least. That's what those quartiles are when you break it into groups of 4. The fourth with the most muscle mass had significantly lower all-cause mortality risk, which lines up with this other information we're seeing. So a lot of in most of these studies, as I mentioned, came out in the last 10 years. So this is exciting information. Other things we see here, and here I'm kind of comparing resistance training to some other things we do like cardiovascular training or like weight loss. Resistance training, as I mentioned, prevents Alzheimer's and cognitive decline in general. So it has a lot of brain health protecting benefits that are independent of other healthy lifestyle factors, such as nutrition, such as cardiovascular. Combining resistance training and cardiovascular training, which everyone should do. Let it be stated on the record, I don't want anyone to avoid cardio just so they can strength train. You should do both. They both are very beneficial in different ways. But combining those two reduce total mortality risk of all participants across ages by 41%. That's the same as someone with a light smoking habit compared to a non-smoker. So that's a profound difference. You can have essentially the same reduction in risk as someone who's giving up smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day by doing your resistance training, cardiovascular training. If you look at this chart I included on the right, there's 4 yellow points. The 2 on the left are without resistance training. The 2 on the right are with resistance training, and it's yes or no for cardio. So the very leftmost is no resistance training, no cardio. They had the highest risk of death. Just cardio with no resistance training dropped it a bit. But if you notice the next point with just resistance training and no cardiovascular exercise, the risk of death was a little bit lower. So if you want to look at a head-to-head, and this was a meta-analysis with a lot of data, the resistance training was actually slightly more protective than the cardio. Again, I'm not saying you should not do cardio, because by far the best benefit was those who did both. They had that 41% reduction in mortality risk. But it shows you how profound an effect resistance training has. And the fact that the 2 complement each other and you have an even lower risk when you do both of them tells you that they're doing different things to help protect you, which is why it's important to do both. Now we're looking at the next 2 points here. Muscular strength was inversely associated with mortality risk, independent of cardiovascular fitness. That kind of backs up what we see in this graph I included here. So that means whether or not you do cardio, muscular strength is protecting your health. Still do your cardio. It's just saying it's doing something different. And then grip strength, as I mentioned before, which is just a way of measuring strength and activity, predicted decreased mortality risk independent of body mass index, which means even if you're overweight, being stronger protects you. So again, I want you to be a healthy body weight. You should definitely focus on having a healthy body mass index and body fat level. But strength protects you regardless of your cardiovascular fitness, regardless of if you're overweight or not. It's still protective. So it's doing something different than these other things, and it's having a powerful effect. I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about plant-based nutrition. Plant-based nutrition, I'm going to let the other lecturers in this conference cover a lot of that because they're doing a great job, and a lot of them have a lot more qualification than I do in talking about it. But I want to highlight some things that tie into strength training a little bit and resistance training. So it benefits resistance training. Plant-based nutrition absolutely does, as I will testify by being a successful natural bodybuilder. Plant proteins have been shown to build just as much muscle mass as animal protein. And that's this chart I included here from that study. Whether you're omnivorous or vegetarian, vegan, they were vegan in this study. Muscle cross-fibril area over a period of time working out and eating a fairly high protein diet, I think it was 20 or 22% of their calories in this study, saw the same increase in muscle mass. So if you're eating enough protein, or even more, some would argue, than you need here, it doesn't matter if you're vegan or omnivore in terms of how much muscle mass you can gain. So in other words, there's no need to focus on animal proteins if your goal is to gain muscle mass and strength. It's not necessary. Plant protein is just as good. Other benefits for resistance training is circulation. You may have heard from Dr. Esselson's studies. He's a presenter in this conference, is when you eat a plant-based diet, your blood actually becomes less viscous, which means it flows more easily. It's thinner. You don't have the buildup of plaques. Your endothelial cells, which line the insides of your blood vessels and release nitric oxide so that your blood vessels can dilate, they're healthier with a plant-based diet. So you're able to dilate your blood vessels more effectively. And with a thinner blood, your blood flows much more easily. What that means is you're delivering nutrients to your muscles more easily, faster, and you're removing waste products from your muscles more easily and faster. That's going to spell better recovery. That's going to spell more success for your resistance training than if you have a damaged circulatory system from your diet. Phytochemicals like polyphenols. If you follow longevity research at all right now, it's kind of a hot topic. Polyphenols are very big. Whether you're in the group that's keto and is telling you to guzzle olive oil because of its polyphenols, or whether you're vegan and eating blueberries because of their polyphenols, or red wine for the resveratrol, which is a polyphenol. It's pretty widely accepted right now and touted that polyphenols are good for you, and they are stimulating your body's natural defenses against aging, which is slowing down damage and increasing repair rates of DNA, gene expression, many things like that. Polyphenols come from plants. They don't come from animal products. So when you're talking about polyphenols, you can substitute in whole plant foods and say the same thing. Whole plant foods are slowing down the aging process, slowing down oxidative damage with these antioxidants, and helping you recover and protect yourself better. So that's going to also spell less damage to your muscles from a hard workout because you have all these protective molecules in your system and faster recovery. So plants have the appropriate amount and type of protein, kind of ties into that study I shared there. If you're eating enough plants, you're getting enough protein, and you're getting all the amino acids you need. You don't need to worry about mixing, combining, or supplementing any kind of special proteins here. And they have improved insulin sensitivity, which this is something better covered by doctors like Dr. Barnard, Dr. Greger. They talk much more in depth about this. But essentially, by eating less saturated fat, by eating more complex carbohydrates, you're improving insulin's ability to stimulate your muscles to pull carbohydrates, pull sugars out of your blood to restore their glycogen. So that's another way your muscles are going to fuel themselves before exercise and recover after exercise, is by getting that signal from insulin that, hey, it's time for us to pull some sugar out of the blood because we can fill up our storage tanks. If that signal gets blunted and you start becoming insulin resistant, that has a whole host of negative health effects. It increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. Obviously, it's directly related to diabetes, directly related to obesity. So a plant-based diet improving insulin sensitivity is absolutely essential for bolstering your response to resistance training and just keeping you healthier overall.